you so much, Laura. And it's great. I am so excited about this evening. And the Steyer boys actually grew up spending their summers in Minnesota. So even though we didn't grow up in Plymouth or in St. Louis Park, we are Minnesotans. And so this is like a really special evening. And we're huge fans of the Humphrey School, but also of our really good friend, Diana Nelson, who made this evening happen, who both Amy and Tom know well. So I don't really want to take much away from you've heard the introduction. Neither Senator Klobuchar or Tom Friedman need an introduction. I will just say this, as running the nation's leading media, kids media and kids advocacy group, we are at this extraordinary inflection point. I mean, Senator Klobuchar was just instrumental in the passage of the American Rescue package, which really, the American Rescue Plan, which is probably the biggest piece of social legislation in decades. And thank you very much for your leadership on that. But I think we are on the cusp of major social policy when it comes to technology. And we have two of the smartest people in the United States here tonight to talk about that. And Senator Klobuchar is now emerging as a huge leader on this in terms of authoring important new bills in the Senate. And I think in the next year or two, the relationship with technology and the large companies which have come to dominate our lives is going to be transformed by leadership in Washington and California, where I live, and through the ideas that Tom and Senator Klobuchar will speak. So I just want to turn it over to Amy Klobuchar and make a few opening remarks. Then we'll have Tom, you can make some opening remarks too, and then let's talk about how technology is reshaping everything.
Well, thank you, Jim, and it's good to see you again. And thanks for your great work. Loved running against your brother. We had a lot of fun together out there.
I couldn't decide to vote for, actually.
There we are. Laura, thank you, and the Humphrey School. What Tom has done a lot with the Humphrey School, as is Jim, but what you might not know is that this is where I had my wedding reception, in the atrium, very romantic and very inexpensive, featuring balloons, not flowers. And that set the tone for the romance of my life with my husband, the Humphrey School. And then Tom, thank you so much for your incredible work and never forgetting where you came from in terms of when you think about issues and global, big, larger than life issues, how it affects people across the country and the work you've done, groundbreaking work on climate change. So I really go back when I noticed Laura just had a little misspeak, which I thought said it all. The title is How Technology is Reshaping Our Democracy. And she almost said how democracy is reshaping technology. I'm like, okay, that's what we should be doing. So I start out with the inauguration day where Senator Blunt and I literally had to make that decision. Do we go and bring this inauguration in a bunker like some people want, or do we go out there and recapture that platform where insurrectionists had literally invaded that very stage? There was still spray paint at the bottom of the columns when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were sworn in. There was makeshift windows behind us. And as I said that day, under that beautiful blue sky with just a little Minnesota snow as I walked down the platform, this was the moment where our democracy picks itself up and brushes itself off and moves forward, as it always does, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a lot of that, if we're going to do that, we have to look at, in part, some of the factors that led to that insurrection, which we're not doing a deep dive in today. But the role that our democracy getting out of our own hands has played and how we can fix it. And to me, a lot of this has to do with our competition policy. I hate the word antitrust, even though I'm putting out a book called Antitrust. I think it should be called competition policy, and also our privacy policy and all the ways we've dealt with tech. These are some of the most sophisticated, incredible companies in the world. We're proud of that and all the people that work there. But that doesn't mean that we don't rejuvenate our democracy and capitalism by actually stepping back and saying there's a lot of harm that's gone on here. There's a lot of factors, and we need to get our act together. We don't even have federal privacy law. It's led to all this misinformation that has gotten us a lot. When you look even on the vaccine, I was in a cafe last weekend, and a kid in a cafe in Minneapolis said, my mother-in-law won't get the vaccine because she thinks there's a microchip that's planted in her because she saw it on the internet. This is going on right now to great harm to all of us. So that's why this is ripe for a discussion. I'm excited about some of the work going on in Congress. That's a hard thing to say, but I mean it. On antitrust, on privacy, and also, by the way, Tom, on finally looking at how we can reward content providers, people in the news business, people who are writing the stuff and doing the investigations and doing the work. And that's a bill that I have with Senator Kennedy and Cicilline and Buck that basically would allow news organizations to negotiate together to get paid for content. So I hope we talk about that as well. But that's my 2 cents here after a long day of a For the People hearing, and I'm excited to be part of this panel and back in with my place of my wedding. So thank you.
Well, Jim, it's first of all, it's great to be with you and Amy. It's so great to be here in Washington and be represented by senators you can be proud of. Not easy for half the country to say, if I might do say so myself. I say a couple things, Jim, that really strike me. The first inning of the internet was awesome. Wow, it was so exciting, it was so cool. People had this Twitter thing and Facebook pages and, blogs, and the first inning was awesome. Second inning, not so awesome. It turns out what we're seeing is that all of these tools, and by this I mean both cyber tools and social networks together, they are, it turns out, sadly, they tend to make efficient authoritarians even more efficient. China. They make inefficient authoritarians more efficient. Egypt. And they are making democracies right now ungovernable. That's what we're really seeing in the second inning. They're making it so hard for lawmakers, like Senator Klobuchar, to when people can't agree on the truth, how do you legislate? And so what do we do with that? Well, I wrote a book back in 1999 called Lexus and the Olive Tree. It was right after Netscape went public. The internet was just borning. And in that book, I actually defined this thing called cyberspace. And I said, there's this new thing, this new place. It's called cyberspace. And it's a place where we're all connected, but no one's in charge. We're all connected, but no one's in charge. There are no stoplights in cyberspace, no courts, no laws, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. Now, as things evolved, China looked at that and said, oh, no. There will be no place where we're all connected and no one's in charge. There will be no terrestrial China where the Communist Party is in charge, and cyber China where Alibaba is in charge and Jack Ma. No. There will be a cyberspace with Chinese communist characteristics. So what the Chinese did was create a ministry of cyberspace, basically. And they said, we are going to project our values into cyberspace. That's why on Sina Weibo, their equivalent of Facebook, Twitter together, you can't be anonymous. I can't be there as the Minnesota twin. You have to be there with your name. That in itself is a huge disciplining force. Unfortunately, we've let Alibaba and Tencent have their own cloud servers in Silicon Valley, but Amazon and Microsoft cannot have their own cloud servers in the Pearl River Delta. So they've basically said, there's this place where we're all connected, and in terrestrial China and cyber China, it'll all be the same. We, the Communist Party, are in charge. The huge failing of democracies up to now is that we have not projected our democratic values into cyberspace. We have not said, so we have a currency out there called Bitcoin that answers to no government. We have a communication system that is encrypted outside the control of any government called Telegram and Signal. We have, and of course, when government's not in charge, it's not that no one's in charge. It means the companies are in charge, which is just the way they like it, even though they tell us that we want to be regulated. So just to close, if there's anything I've learned about the internet, from writing about it, going back to Lexis, it's that the internet is an open sewer of untreated, unfiltered information. Oh my God, it's full of diamonds and rubies and pearls and gems. But it's also full of toxic waste, cut glass, rusty cans, and broken nails. And if we don't build the internal software into our kids, that's why I'm such a huge fan of what Jim is doing. Teaching basically what Common Sense Media is doing is teaching digital civics. If we don't build the internal software into our citizens to sort out the toxic materials from the pearls and gems, we will not keep this democracy. We will not keep this democracy. So Amy, the work you're doing is so important right now, because the project you're on, as I see it, is you're trying to project our democratic values now into cyberspace, which we have failed to do. And I can only wish you and
So let me pick up and ask while we wait for Tom on that. Let me ask you a question, Senator Klobuchar, because I think Tom will unfreeze.
I thought you like froze Tom.
I didn't know. I don't know. Maybe it's the Humphrey School.
No, it's the internet companies.
No, correct. They did not like what he was saying.
Just kidding. That was a joke.
But I have a question for you, because this really falls on what you said, but also what Tom just said. So we're the biggest tech advocacy group on these issues. And at one point a few years ago, we got so frustrated with trying to get stuff done in Washington, not because of your leadership, just because there was we passed the big privacy law in California because we could get it done. Now, looking at the issues related to technology and democracy that you're on, and then we're going to get to competition. And I agree that's a better way to call it. You are now the co-sponsor of the bill that Mark Warner and Mazie Hirono have done around Section 230. Obviously, Common Sense is a big sponsor of that bill. But I have a question, which is, when you look at all the misinformation and disinformation that spread the big lie about the 2020 election, and also the disinformation that's going on right now about vaccinations and in the anti-vax, what kind of legislation? Good to see you, Tom. But I'm picking up what you're saying and asking Amy, and then to go to you. So let's talk about how the US government can now, in 2021 and beyond, put in place the guardrails that Tom was talking about.
Exactly.
So how would you reform or completely overhaul 230, but more broadly, how do you hold Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, et cetera, accountable for what's on their platforms and the amplification of all the misinformation and sewer garbage that Tom was referring to? I would think it's a perfect way of saying it. But
I thought you were going to say it's a perfect segue to me in Washington. I was listening to all of his beautiful language about China and the global thing, and I'm sitting there thinking, my situation. And then when he got down to the toxic sewer, I could relate. So I really think that there is some common ground here. I hate to use those overused words, because you're starting to see pushback on both sides. Now, did I like that, we didn't even have hearings on this till close to the election, and Trump just trying to have, personal vendettas against companies, and that's when he would pick them out? That is not the way to go. But the way to go is to have some sensible rules in place. And I start with the privacy rules you talk about in California. Well, they've been lobbying against having any federal privacy law until California and some other states started out. That's not crazy. States are, are laboratories of democracy, to quote a famous person. And so now it bubbles up to the federal level. Now, how does that federal law look is different to many people. But it is time to move on a federal law that still allows our states to operate and do what they need, but to have more stricter privacy. And I've got one bill with Kennedy, but Maria Cantwell did a big bill on this. The other is, you point out, Section 230. And what Warner and Mazie and I did is basically say, okay, let's carve out some things where there's not immunity. We are, and Europe has, done some good work. I'm a fan of what Margaret Vestager has done when it comes to competition policy. I've done a bunch of things with her, but we're a little different, right? We have First Amendment protections and things like that. But you could carve out certain kinds of things, discriminatory conduct, civil rights. We carved out ads, paid ads, which they're just With paid ads, we still haven't passed the Honest Ads Act on the political side, which means, as pointed out at our hearing today by the former Republican chair of the FEC, Trevor Potter, who testified for our bill, because they literally don't have to put disclosures and disclaimers on political ads, while the radio and TV have to put all kinds of things in place, and libraries where you can look at it and things like that. So there is a bunch of things. Now, one way you get there is with government change and rules, and we should do that. Simultaneously, I know we'll talk about this later, you should truly have competition to allow, through capitalism, some companies to develop bells and whistles on privacy. And how can we do that when Mark Zuckerberg, to use Exhibit A of his email, says, we'd rather buy than compete. And so when they buy everything under them, it's harder to get that going. So I think you should be doing both things at once.
So let me ask a quick follow-up on platform accountability. And then, Tom, I really would like to hear how you would hold the platforms accountable. So one of the big things we've looked at in working with you and Warner and Hirono and some of the other folks on this is we look at 230 as essentially, and we know Ron Wyden wrote it in 1996, but it's basically, for the audience, a get out of jail free card for the platforms. It means they are not liable for any of the content on their platforms. And we know it was written to stimulate innovation when the internet was at a very, and inning one. It was like before inning number. It was when they were pre-game batting practice. Yeah. It was when the Twins were in pre-game batting practice. But here's my question. Would you now hold the companies liable for the content on their platforms? This is the government doing it, notwithstanding that they should be doing it from a social responsibility standpoint. Well, would you hold them liable?
Okay, first of all, we have done this. We've taken the first step with human trafficking. And that was very controversial when we did it. Well, it passed unanimously, but there were a lot of people that didn't like it. Now we are suggesting to take the next step with the paid ads, with certain discriminatory and civil rights violations and the like, so that we take that next step. And that's where we go to get rid of the immunity when it comes to certain types of speech, because they are the biggest companies in the world. They should be able to hire the people, hire more people, great, make a little less money, but hire the people to be looking at all this content to sift through it, because right now it's not working.
Well, let me ask you this, and Tom will be back in a second.
Tom is, yeah.
I know but here's we know that a lot of the events of January 6th were actually fomented on Facebook groups. That's where the white supremacists have basically lurked, other than on Parler. So my question is, and Tom, I'd like to hear it too, is Common Sense is going to come out really strongly on this, that we feel they should be held civilly and liable for what's on their platforms if it produced the toxic student led to the sick. Mm-hmm. Can you see the Senate and Congress on bipartisan grounds coming on?
Right. Well, you could see, and a number of these types of activities that were going on online is falling out of the immunity section because it was criminal activity, it was discriminatory activity, and the like. But there is absolutely no doubt that this is how they communicated with each other to get this insurrection going. And we're getting more and more information about that communication, and about how from the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers with these prosecutions of these cases, which are so incredibly important.
So, Tom, what would you do about sort of the 230 question and the platform accountability stuff?
Well, yeah, I think it's all about, again, projecting our values into cyberspace, Jim. So, I worked for many years for a news organization that was printed on a dead tree. And on one side of this dead tree were people we called editors. And they said that if I spell Senator Klobuchar's name wrong, I have to correct it. And on the other side were regulators who said that if Senator Klobuchar wants to run a political ad on my dead tree, she's got to identify herself and where her money comes from. Then on the dead tree, we had two kinds of people. We had people called readers and people called advertisers. And then along came Facebook. And Facebook said, no, we are not a dead tree. We are a platform. We're a platform, something totally different. We don't want any of your editors, and we don't want any of your regulators, but we want all of your readers and all of your advertisers. We didn't know what to do. And they said, by the way, we're cool. You are mainstream media, we are cool. And what they said to us was, trust us, trust us. And we trusted them. And I think they deeply violated our trust. And so their problem is the law of large numbers. they are a newspaper with 3 billion people, basically 3 billion editors and publishers on their newspaper.
Isn't it true that 3 out of 4 people get their news that way,
Yeah,
right? Through
yeah.
these platforms.
Unbelievable. Yep.
And you cannot possibly have enough editors to edit a 3 billion person reported newspaper. And so they use AI, they use all kinds of systems. I'm not saying they're not trying to some degree, but clearly every time this happens, and the Capitol is the most egregious, there's a oops, sorry, that's not true, it couldn't be, and then okay, it is kind of true, but we're working on it. And what the Capitol story tells me is we can't afford this anymore. So I don't care how many editors you have to hire, and if that means you have to have fewer people on your platform, and I know that has implications. I don't care. I really don't care. You are a danger to our democracy.
One other thing along those lines is what I mentioned, is allowing content providers to negotiate and have the power to combine their forces. And this played out in a big way in Australia. And if people don't believe this about monopolies, only monopolies do this. They are able to say to an entire country, a very successful country, we're going to leave and you're going to be stuck with no search engine or no major social media platform because we're leaving if you make us charge for content. Yeah. That's what happened. And eventually they backed down because, among other things, people in the US, people in Europe, people who were working together stood up and spoke out, and they started to realize that they couldn't get away with this. But that is so allowing for that kind of negotiation also would make a big difference, as well as looking at the Section 230 immunity, as well as putting in place other rules and regulations. Don't forget algorithms, which algorithms, as someone who works in the middle, like these are boring for their algorithms. They don't like it when you like have a bipartisan tweet or a bipartisan Facebook post. Okay. So anything extreme on either side does better. And you might say, okay, great, that's capitalism, but it's affecting how people think and what they're exposed to in our democracy.
So let me ask you a follow-up question on that. And Tom, I'd like to hear what you say too. So we worked last year very closely with a colleague from Columbia, Tim Wu, around issues about competition. And then he was our senior advisor. Now he just went into the National Economic Council, which is a good thing in our opinion. And Bruce Reed is there, my good colleague who wrote the piece on Section 230 in my book with me. Here's a question. We've called for publicly, Common Sense has, forcing Facebook to divest itself of WhatsApp and Instagram. And you may not want to comment on that, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Senator Klobuchar. And Tom, I'd like to know, how much should we break these guys up? Because we actually believe that competition is the big, and I know you mentioned Margrethe Vestager, who's been great on this in Europe, who is the head of competition over there. How far should we go? And Tom, I'd like to know how far. We think you should go really far, but how far, how do you think overall?
I've been way out there. So my book is coming out April 27th, and you can read it. Having had a front row seat to this, I represented MCI. I was in the private sector for 14 years when they were pushing to take on monopoly local exchange carriers. What did we see come out of the breakup of AT&T? Much lower long distance rates and a cell phone industry that went from cell phones the size of a briefcase in Gordon Gekko's Wall Street movie to where we are right now, except for Chuck Schumer, who still has a flip phone. And so that being said, we look at what's happened now. I think Exhibit A, as a former prosecutor, is Mark Zuckerberg's words. I quoted some of them, but this was my favorite email that Cicilline captured in their hearings, talking about WhatsApp and Instagram. These businesses are nascent, but the network's established. The brands are already meaningful. And if they grow to a large scale, they could be very disruptive to us. Okay. That is Exhibit A of a monopoly. Technology is supposed to be disruptive. Disruption is cool in a competitive sense. And our country over time has rejuvenated our capitalism by having some rules of the road and using the antitrust laws, with Republicans often taking the lead, like Senator Sherman did the Sherman Act, like way back, go back to Teddy Roosevelt, Adam Smith, who warned of the overgrown army of monopolies to have functional capitalism. So I am in favor of divesting these assets. I have questioned it for quite a while, and I think that through several administrations now, nothing has happened. And I am glad that Macon Delrahim and that the former head of DOJ antitrust under Trump, despite the mess ups when it came to the California clean fuel rules and marijuana and the like. But I'm glad he did that lawsuit on Google. And I'm glad that FTC chairman and the FTC brought a very comprehensive suit against Facebook with the AGs across the country. I'm glad that that happened under that administration, honestly, because it should not be a partisan thing. And now Senator Grassley and I have the bill to add the money so that these agencies aren't using duct tape and Band-Aids to take on the biggest companies in the world. They are literally a shadow of their former selves when Ronald Reagan was president, if you go back to the breakup of AT&T. So that's step one, and then we could do some things to change the laws, but I'll let Tom talk.
Tom, what do you think about this issue? What they think is existential, I think the companies do.
I agree with everything Amy says. I think it's absolutely, it's madness that not one company, one person controls Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram.
Crazy.
That's absolutely crazy. How do we get into this situation? And it can only help competition. Imagine if they were split off and each one had a different privacy policy, and one was, or different standards policy, a la common sense, I mean, that's how they distinguish themselves, that there'll be more truth here if you come here. So I just really think that that's a urgent necessity. And I really hope it happens. Amy, my question for you is, how likely is any of this? How close is it? How likely? And where is the big opposition? Obviously from the companies, but within Congress. That's
a great question.
None at all. It'll be easy. No. So first of all, we've had two incredible hearings in the last few weeks. Cicilline did, and I did. Our hearing, there was a lot of agreement on, as there was in his with Congressman Buck, about adding resources to the agencies. I almost had that done at the end of last year to change the fees on mega mergers, which would add all this money to the agencies. And the White House actually supported it. Meadows was working with me. It cleared the Senate, and then a few House Republicans stopped it because that was an agreement. There's every reason to believe we can get that done first. The newspaper bill I mentioned, Mitch McConnell was on that bill last time and is still supportive of it. Dick Durbin supports it. I think that has a chance. It's actually all news organizations. The proposals I have made, and we're working with the House right now, there's some specific tech proposals and things we can do with the gateway companies that may well pick up speed. But then I look at the antitrust laws as a whole because I see this consolidation from everything from cat food to caskets. In John Oliver's words, after doing a half an hour on this and showing the online travel and everything else, he at the very end said, if this is enough to make you want to die, good luck. Because there's now only 3 places you can buy caskets. And by the way, now one bought the other, so there's 2. My bill would shift the burden on big mega mergers so that the companies would have to prove that it doesn't hurt competition for the biggest mergers. They can still get them through. They just have to show it. And then also on existing situation, which is our big problem, it would again make it easier to look at exclusionary conduct. The search engine that screwed certain content and puts it at the bottom, and small businesses and the like. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. It's pretty exciting. And I think we have to somehow get this versions of this. I have the big bill, but we're going to split it off and look for Republican authors on different pieces of it. Right now it's Democratic, and they're doing the same in the House, and we will get through what we can. That's basically my approach.
And Tom, let me ask you a question, because there is the case against Google. We worked on it. We really worked on the Facebook case that Senator Klobuchar mentioned. How about Amazon? Your cat food question is really almost an Amazon question. Could you see Amazon really coming under not just antitrust scrutiny, but change in the next couple of years?
Yes, and I'll let Tom.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it just it's sort of disorienting to me when I go into Whole Foods and they ask me if I have Amazon Prime. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know. It's just something that big. The difference is, and maybe Amy can speak to this, this is a monopoly that on the surface seems to drive prices down, not drive prices up. And it does have a big competitor in Walmart for a lot of its business. So I'm not here to defend them one way or the other, but I'm not sure they're quite analogous, but and Google, to me, there's a Google issue and there's a YouTube issue, because Google also, I get the idea that a search engine benefits by the number of people who use it. And so there are positive effects there as well. But just nobody, it just can't be healthy for democracy that this much power is in so few hands, number one. But for me, the question of Facebook is just so important when so many people get their news from that. And it's so obvious what happened. Yeah, I said to my wife, the other day, just the country's not right. Country's not right. We're living on borrowed time. I pray for Joe Biden every day because we're living on borrowed time. There's just a lot of crazy just underneath Joe Biden, that he's sitting on. And the country's not right. People believe crazy stuff.
Yep. And
they're saying crazy stuff. And that is due in large part to where they're getting their information.
Facebook.
As my friend Marina Gorbis says, we're destroying our cognitive immunity, our ability to sort out fact from fiction. And you destroy the cognitive immunity in democracies, and sooner or later, you're going to get another Trump, only one who's a little bit smarter. And I just feel we got to do this work that Amy's working on, Jim, that you're working on. Country's not right. It's not right.
Do you think, Senator Klobuchar, you see that? Do you see a real progress? Because we want you, folks on both sides, Al, and the Biden administration, to acknowledge what Tom just said and realize that if we could transform the tech environment, it will have an impact on these issues. Also, the extraordinary inequality that exists in society today. We saw during the pandemic that just got much worse, and a significant amount that's due to the power of large tech companies. Do you think that message could resonate and actually lead to big change in the next couple of years?
I do. And again, I look at two of you respecting history. This has happened time and time again in American history. Maybe it's once in a century, but things happen. People have had it. The Grangers movement of the Midwest with their farmers, with their pitchforks, the unions organizing, that was all about people having too much power. And now, if we are in this sophisticated business climate, our rules, our laws have to be as sophisticated as the people who are messing around with us. And I do think, as different as the political parties are right now, I just went through a hearing that cemented that to me again. I think there are people of goodwill that realize, especially elected officials, because they are subject to a lot of this on both sides, the extremes, that things are getting out of hand and out of control as we try to look at what people's common beliefs are. And that just leads me to think there's a reason that there is right and left taking on tech right now. It's not just like, oh, it's popular. It's actually kind of complex. I tried doing a Facebook post or Twitter tweet on monopolies and tech, and sometimes you do okay, but it's not the best, but you keep trying. That's my point, is that when that's happening, it's because there's an innate belief, ingrained belief that something is really wrong here with our democracy. And that's why that moment for me, when Pence and Blunt and I were there at 4 a.m. with these 3 young women with the mahogany boxes walking through the actual broken glass and the smears on the walls to head over to the House. Despite our vast political differences, we knew we had to do our jobs at that moment. And that is the feeling that I want to have transferred into the work we have to do on competition policy now. And so I have no choice but to believe that our democracy can get through it. And I look at history, it has in some really tough times. And I look at the fact that you do have both political parties now stirred up about this lack of control for maybe different reasons, but a lack of control over our own future and our own democracy and our own destiny, which is completely inimical to everything America ever stood for from the founding of our country.
Tom, I called the book Which Side of History because I actually wanted the guys running the tech companies to look in the mirror and ask themselves that question and ask it on behalf of their kids, because I know all of them. And in a couple of cases, I think they're really on the wrong side of history. And we've mentioned who they are already in this conversation. Mike, we just saw this extraordinary passage of social legislation in the American Rescue Plan. I mean, really historic legislation, although it was not bipartisan. It was really partisan.
No, we used 51 votes to get it done, which is kind of key for other discussions. Is that where you're going?
No, it's more to say, Tom, because this is that moment. I think you're right about where we are in history right now. I think we're at this extraordinary, as a poli-sci professor at Stanford on the side, I believe we're at this extraordinary moment in American history and political history. And my question to Tom was, you saw this major piece of social legislation. Who would have thought Joe Biden would have ushered in that kind of extraordinary legislation? How about tech? This is the moment. I mean, honestly, I think what Senator Klobuchar is saying is absolutely right. Can you see the companies themselves, not fake ads from Facebook every day in the New York Times and Washington Post saying, please regulate us, but can you see some of the executives themselves, because they're under pressure, really fundamentally changing some of this?
I don't know. I'm not close enough to them, Jim.
Yeah.
We're not. We don't exchange Christmas cards, and I just, I believe that the default for them is always to resist regulation. That's just the default. From these guys grew up in a very libertarian environment.
Correct.
I just really think it has to be imposed on them in a wise way. I don't want to hurt them. These are enormously innovative companies. They produced a lot of good things. You don't get to 3 billion users just by putting out garbage, So I'm not out to destroy them, but I am out to protect the democracy that enabled them. And I just think that I just go back to this feeling I have that we're living on borrowed time. This is work that we have so much work we have to get done. Because I learned one thing on January 6th. This opposition party must never be allowed to have national power again in the White House until they go through a real reformation. They cannot be trusted with national power. And the essence of their corruption, and I'm not out for some political rant. I'm like Amy, I'm a centrist. Can't we all just get along? Minnesota guy. But when I saw that Powell woman, that lawyer, issue that filing to say that any rational person would never have believed what I said, the level of moral corruption there, not to mention legal corruption, is so unspeakably deep that those people must never, ever be allowed near power again until that party gets right. Yeah. Because they showed us on January 6th what can happen. And I see no learning by many of them. The best of them are just leaving Amy in the Senate and retiring. And the worst of them are competing, to be the next Trump. And so that's why I say I walk around with a pit in my stomach. I'm so glad of the legislation that's passed. We have so much more work to do, but country's not right. Country's not right when this other major party is so off.
And I will just say, we were working with Josh Hawley, my former student at Stanford.
Oh,
yes, indeed. And David Kennedy was his thesis advisor, Tom, right?
I know David wrote me about that.
And I called him up and I was like, and we said, we're just not, because of what he did, I'm like, we're not going to have you carry major legislation with us until you basically acknowledge what you just said, because it's so outrageous. And that's sad. And so, Amy, what would you like the public to do? So we have a great what do you want your fellow Minnesotans to do? What do you want common sense to do to move this forward in the right way?
Yeah, I think talking about this issue whenever you can. Pretty soon we're going to be through this pandemic, light at the end of the tunnel, and this is the time to take that out, because we've lost hundreds of thousands of small businesses, and it's actually an even more fragile time for these issues, because it's a fragile issue for consolidation and more power in their hands, but it's also a fragile issue for privacy and misinformation and the like. And I think posting online trying to get this going, working with your group, of course, Jim, and talking to your friends about it, and not just taking things as they are and thinking, oh, this is convenient, I got one cheap thing here, because what's going to happen is those prices are going to go up again, and just not being used. You're considered by these companies to be data centers, right? They're making money off of you. Trying to go to small businesses, local businesses, it matters. And just trying to take this on, because in the end, this has got to be a citizen effort. There's no way that we can out lobby these huge lobbyists without the people behind it. And so that's what I'm reaching out to people of our state. We have a really strong history from Hubert Humphrey on of taking on the big interests. And he actually was involved in a lot of these bills, which I didn't know till I journeyed down this path. And so we've got to remember that. And we like entrepreneurship, we like ideas. And if you like all that, you got to work with me to get this done.
How great.
Okay.
Laura.
Amy, make sure that your office sends me a copy of your book. And
Okay.
let's talk about this.
I know. We'll do
Over 100 cartoons in it.
Oh,
Because they're trying to make antitrust fun again.
I want to do a book party for Amy, Tom. I'm
So there you
serious.
go. When it's
Great. I am totally into that.
yeah, well, my best thing about this is my rival but actual friend who I had lunch with and walked around with him and his dogs, Pete Buttigieg, from the debate stage. Pete's book was called Trust from the Fall, and mine is called Antitrust. Our rivalry continues. Yes.
You got to unmute. Laura, you have to unmute.
Yeah,
You have to
Laura,
unmute
I know you're
yourself.
trying to interrupt us, but you can't.
Yeah, you got to unmute.
I am now unmuted.
It's
With
Minnesota
that, I
polite.
think we should wrap it there. I do have to tell you, though, I sent Amy this in a private chat. I have in my office the banners that you used at your wedding. I
Yeah,
know, because on the back.
yes. Oh, yes. We rolled them up with little ribbons
that's
and
so great.
That's right.
did that. Gave it to all the guests. That's true.
Amy, Tom, Jim, thank you. That was a lively and a troubling conversation, and I believe it was intended to be both. It's for all of the viewers and listeners like me, I think we should be concerned. I think we should also be motivated to learn, to read, to study, and then to act. As we talked about, even though I misspoke at the beginning, the name of this webinar was How Technology is Reshaping Democracy. But what if we said a year from now, wouldn't it be great if we could come back and say the name of this webinar is How Democracy is Reshaping Technology. And with that, let's leave it there, and we'll all come back when we do a book event for the senator.
Okay. See you guys
Take
later.
care, everybody. Thank you
you.
all
It was
so
a lot of
much.
fun.
Pretty good, y'all.
That was
Okay.
great.
Thanks for letting Tom talk, Jim.